Begin the current Daf Mesechta Bava Kama Daf Samachas. Begin 5 lines down at the top of the Yomid. The Gemara is in the middle of a conversation from the previous Daf. We had mentioned this concept previously, but then the Gemara introduced it again regarding a later halacha in our previous Mishnah. We said that in Agoinim Achar Gan Mishlam Tashlumi Kefil. If you steal from the Gan of himself, you don't pay Kefil. It says Begunim Beisa Ish, but below me Beisa Ganav. On that, Rav qualified. He says we only learned this only before years, but after years. So it's not Beisa Ganav anymore, then that first Ganav becomes the owner, and now you would pay kefil if you steal from the Ganav, which Rav Shesha says, I said when Rav said this halach, he must have been sleeping because he brought a brace, he asked a question, the Gemara answered the question, our Gemara continues to try to bring a raya like Rav Shesha's or like Rav, if the original owner was meyayish, and then someone steals from the Ganav, would he be chayiv kefil or not? Turn to Daf and throughout the entire world. So I'm discussing today's daf, like we said, are this halacha of ina goyim v'chagan masham tashlumi kefil. The Mishnah said whoever steals from the one who stole does not pay kefil. Rav says la'acha yish would be chayiv because yish is kaina. Rav says no, la'acha yish would be potter because yish is not kaina, and therefore it's still considered begunim beisa ish v'lo mi beisa ganav. The Gemara brings many different opinions regarding the chiv of Dalad V'Hei, Machligas Rav Shesha, Rav Nachman, regarding Tevicha Mechira, and maybe even differentiating in Tevicha Mechira itself regarding before Yish and La'acha Yish. Machligas Rav Yechon and Rishlakish, where the person can make his object hektish when it is Einer B'Shrusi, when it's not in his domain. So begin the current Daf Samachas, 5 lines down at the top of the Yomid. Like we said, we had been explaining the halacha of our Mishnah of Ina Gad Machagan Mashlam Kefil. The person stole an object from a Ganav who originally stole it from the owner. So the second Ganav is exempt from paying kefil because it's begun to be ish Ganav. However, the question is regarding the halacha of la'achar yish. Rav said, that was only said lefnei yish, but la'achar yish, yeah, because Rav holds yish is kind, and now you're stealing it from the Ganav. He's like the balabais, he's the beisa ish. Avshesh says no, even la'achar yish like come the Ganav arishin because he holds yish is eino kind. So the Gemara says Tashema. The Gemara tries to bring a raya. Not like Rav that says Yish is kind. The Brisa says that if the one who steals from the owner an ox or a sheep and he slaughters it or he sells it, so the halacha is you got to pay 4 or 5 times the amount depending on the sheep or the ox. Says the Brisa, we're comparing Tevicha and Mechira. Ma Tevicha it's just like slaughtering. Doesn't go back, it can't be undone. Af Mechira, so to selling Shein Chezeres is that it doesn't go back. Now, the assumption of the Gemara is, what it means to say is, that you're not going to be liable for Mechira only where it's a full-fledged sale and it's acquired by the buyer. Just like it's totally cannot be undone by Tavicha, by slaughtering, so to Mechira. So, says the Gemara, Emas, when is this? If you think to say that it's before the original owner gave up hope, Amay in the Chezeres. So why wouldn't it go back, as Rashi explains, Shina Rishus, which is when you sell it to someone else, it changes domain without years, no one holds that it's going to be kaina. So Ela, rather obviously, L'achayish, must be that it's after the original owner gave up hope. So when it reaches the hand of the buyer, you have 2 things. You have years, the original owner gave up hope, and you have Shina Rishus, which changes domain from the Ganav to the buyer, and therefore he's going to be kaina. Oh, so Be'isa Gedayter Kanye, but if you hold a grab, that a Ganav acquires a stolen item, just with the original owner giving up hope. So my Misham Dal V'Hei, why would the Ganav have to pay 4 or 5 times the amount now when he sells it to someone else? Because we're saying that's the case that we're comparing to Tvicha, which is when it was Yish, and then you have Shinir Rishus. Wait a second. The reason why Rav held with it when you steal from the Ganav, they're going to have to pay kefil if it's la'acha yish, is because it's not mebeis haganav anymore to make begunam mebeis ish, because he owns it now. If he owns it, so he's slaughtering his own thing, he's selling his own thing. Why would he be chayiv on the tvicha umechira if it's la'acha yish? Says the Gemara, Kadam Rav Nachman. It's like Rav Nachman says later in the sugya, which we'll see. We'll see that's a different context. We're excluding if he sold it to him for 30 days. Hachanami here, it's also prat l'shehikn l'shleishim. It's specifically if he sold him for 30 days, like Rashi says. In other words, the truth is that we're talking about before years. So what are we saying in the Brisa that it has to be in the Chezeres? That's not coming to exclude where it's not effective what he's doing. No, you could say even though what he's doing is not effective, because it's before years, nothing's effective. You can't sell something before the original only gave up hope. Still, the Torah is going to hold you liable because of like we answered on the top of the summit in the previous daf, not because nishtarish, it wasn't really effective, it was shona b'chet. He just repeated the sin, he stole, and then he did another thing, he sold it to someone else. So you're right, you would be chayiv even though it's before years. What's it coming to exclude when we say enu chezeres, that we're comparing it to the tvicha, to the slaughtering? That's only coming to exclude where the ganav didn't sell it to the buyer, but to do work with it for 30 days. That's like renting it. That's like leasing it. That's not even a sale. That's not considered, that's chezeres, that's coming back after 30 days. So in chezeres is open for interpretation. The Gemara in the question thought in the chezeres meant it's final. That means it's a good sale. Oh, that sounds not like Rav, but that means to say you had yish already. If you had yish, why would you be chayiv in the mechira? No. It's before yish. And that's why you chayiv, because it's not yours. So what does it mean in the chezeres? It means excluding if, let's say, chezeres would mean if you only sold it for 30 days, not even a sale, that's the case. So that's not difficult on Rav. So the Gemara says, okay, the Gemara continues to ask on Rav in the following brayso. Ganav uva achav ganvay. If someone stole, and then someone else came and stole from him. So again, you have a lot of these cases. This stuff is a lot of these case type of examples. So Harisha Misham Teshumi Kefil, the first guy who stole from the original owner has to pay, when he's caught red-handed, he has to pay double the amount. The second guy is only going to pay the principal to the first ganav, the guy he stole from, because like we said, it says Begunav and Beisa Ish. You only pay kefil to the house of the owner. Here he stole from the house of the ganav, he's not going to pay kefil. Okay, continues the brayso. Ganav umachar. Let's say the guy stole and then he sold it. So the buyer acquires it with shina reshus, that it changed domain from the ganav to the buyer. So therefore, what happens now if a va'ach of a ganvai, someone comes now and steals it from the buyer? Okay, so Allah is like this. The first guy has to pay 4 or 5 times the amount because not only did he steal, he then sold it. That's called a tavach umachar. He sold it. And the second ganav will pay double the amount to the buyer, who was the owner, because he was kind with Shin Rishus. He'll have to pay kefil to that guy. Continues the brayso. What happens another case? What happens if a guy steals something, but tavach he slaughters it? Now someone comes and steals it from him. The first guy's going to pay 4 or 5 times the amount again because he did tavicha, he slaughtered it, which the Torah says you'll pay 4 or 5 times the amount. The second guy is not going to pay kefil, only the principal, which later on the Gemara is going to ask, why doesn't he pay kefil? But the first guy already acquired it with a shina maisa. He did something that actively changed the item, and if you change something, shinu is kaina. We had a shayla going shina Hashem, whatever, but this shina maisa, that should acquire it. Okay, we'll get back to that. But there was 3 cases, and says the Gemara, but one thing is we see by the middle case was ganav umachar, the guy steals and he sells. Someone came and out stole from the lekeach, from the buyer. So we said the first guy has to pay 4 or 5 times the amount because he did a geneva and a mechira. The second guy pays kefil from the lekeach, which acquired it. So therefore, it's v'gunam beis ish. Says the Gemara, Emas, when did the first ganev sell it? As the Gemara explains, if it's before the original owner give up hope, so I understand. Why would the second ganev pay kefil when he stole from the buyer? That, although there was a change of domain when it went from the original ganev to the buyer, but the original owner didn't give up hope. Mikal mandam the kandi do it. Is anyone who would say without yish that the buyer is going to acquire it? So if he didn't acquire it, so it's not begunah mebeisa ish. It's still considered mebeisa ganav. In other words, he shouldn't be chayav kefil. It's not the original owner. El pshita, and this is what the Gemara is leading up to, not like Rav. Obviously, it's la'achar yish. So when the buyer got it, there was 2 things. There was yish and shinei reshus. Wait a second. If you're like Rav, that yish is kaina. Why does the first ganav pay 4 or 5 times the amount? He sold his own object. Now, Rashi says, if you're going to ask, the Gemara could have answered, for example, where the original owner gave up hope after the ganav already sold it, then the buyer acquires it, but by the ganav there was no years for him to acquire it, Says Rashi, yes, you got the Gemara's answer. Interesting that Rashi does that. Says like obviously you would be on to this differentiation, which the Gemara is going to answer. But for now, the Gemara assumes that the Yush happened before the Ganav sold it. And then when the Ganav sold it, so now the Shinushus, Yush, oh, okay, so it's basic ish now. And whoever steals from him will be Chayiv Kefil. The question is, why then is the first Ganav Chayiv Dal Behei, if according to Rav, Shalai Teveach, Shalai Humaych? That's one question. Assume moreover the Ktani Reisha, we learned in the Reisha that said Ganav u'ba'acha b'ganvay. If someone stole something and someone stole from him, Rishon Misham Teshumi Kevel, the first guy has to pay Kevel. Asheni in Misham Karen, the second guy only pays Karen, because again that's V'gunim in base Haganav. Says the Gemara Mechti. Let's see. La'acha yish kaimina. Now it's important to understand what the Gemara is saying, because as Rashi explains, you just told me from the middle case that must be talking about, because or else it would be impossible to understand how if someone steals from the buyer, he'd be chayiv kefil. It's only if it was already after years. So from the middle case we see, they were talking about it's after years. So if that's the case, the first case also is talking about lachar years. Okay. So if you say that the years kind, but if you only grab the years kind, so sheina mayin mishal al karen. Why, when the second ganav steals from the first ganav, is the only chayiv for the principal? What are you talking about? It's not mebeis haganav anymore. It's mebeis ish. Because the original owner already gave up hope. It becomes the ganavs. Allah, from these two questions, from the first case and the middle case, Shema Mina, we obviously see Yish loy kani. The Yish alone would not be kaina. It's only together with like a Shina Rishuz. Bikash l'Rav, and that's difficult in Rav, who said Yish is kaina. Those are two questions on Rav. Omar Rav, Zok Rav. But Tizbru, you think it's logical? You think this brisa is correct? That you're going to use it to ask on Rav? Let's go to the case of the Sefer, which Rashi already addressed, and said we're going to ask this question that you're asking the Reisha and the middle case on Rav. Look at the last case, how it doesn't make sense. The Brisa says, Ganav v'tavach, if a Ganav stole something, he slaughtered it. Someone else come now steals that slaughtered animal from him. So he said, the first guy has to pay 4 or 5 times the amount, because he did Geneva and Tevicha. The second guy only pays the principal. Wait a second. Is there anyone who holds that a change in action, in changing the essence of the thing itself, when you slaughter it, you're doing something different to the object, that you're not going to acquire it? So if that's the case, so why does the second Ganav only pay the principal? You should pay kefil. It's v'gunim b'beis ish. So says Rava, you can't ask him this brayso. So look at the last case. It doesn't make sense. Ela rather la'olam kula lifnei yish. Rather, you have to say that the whole brayso is talking about before yish. And that's why the Reisha, the first case, makes sense now. Why the second guy is pater from kefil, because the first Ganav didn't acquire it, because it's before Yish. The Eipich Sefer l'mitziasa u'mitzias l'Sefer. We had a difficulty on Rav on the middle case, but the Sefer didn't make sense anyway. So it says, Rav, you know what you have to do? You actually have to switch around the attribution of what's being said in the middle case to the last case. The last case is the middle case. As the Gemara says like that. You have to read like this. Ganav v'machar. It's a little bit of a cheshbon, but it's like Ganav v'machar. Someone stole something and he sold it. Uva'acha b'ganvay. And someone came along and stole from him. So this is the middle case. So the halacha is not like the way we had quoted originally. That's like we said. Yeah, the first guy pays 4 or 5 times because he went and he stole and he sold. And the second guy is the guy who only pays Keren. Why? Because the Shinur Rishus below years. Remember, because we're changing the halacha over here, and we're explaining that it's really the halacha of the Seifa, meaning originally we quoted this halacha that the second guy pays kefil. Now we're switching it. It's not true. He doesn't pay kefil. It's actually, that's the halacha of the Seifa, as we're going to say in a second. What it said in the Seifa really belongs in the middle case. Second guy only pays the principal. Why? Because again, we're explaining it's before Yish. So although the Shinur Rishus, that it goes to a Lekeach, but below Yish, Lekani, without Yish, not going to acquire anything. Oh, great. That works out perfect according to Rav. And the last case of Ganav v'tavach, if a guy stole and he slaughtered, bo'ach v'ganvay, and someone else came and stole from him, the first guy's going to pay dalad v'hei because he stole and he slaughtered. And the second guy's going to pay kefil. That's the halacha we said originally by the middle case. We're now using it for the last case, of course, because the kind of machine maisa, because they acquired it with a change of action to the thing itself. This first ganav now became his. So the second ganav is stealing mebesa ish. So it'll be chayiv kefil. That's one approach in how to explain this brisa. Why it's not difficult to Rav, that you have to say it's actually before Yish, which makes sense for the Reisha, and you have to switch around the case of the middle and the last case, because or else the last case doesn't make sense anyway. That's one approach. Papa, he actually says, no, lo'il moy tepach. Truth is, you don't have to go ahead and switch it around. Seifa, which again, we had a difficulty with. We didn't understand why would the last Ganav be chayiv only Keren, when the first guy did Tavicha, which he did a Shina Maisa. So the first Ganav should be the Beisa Ish now, you should be chayiv Kefil. Says the Gemara, Beishamai. Don't worry, the safe is Beishamai. When you do a change to something, it remains as its status was, and it doesn't change, and therefore it's still considered Beisa Ganav. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, that you're explaining that you're not changing the brisa. So you're leaving it as we originally thought, that's talking about la'acha yish. Because if it's not la'acha yish, then the middle case is difficult. How is it possible that the second ganav would be chayiv kefil? So if that's the case, that you're keeping it as achar yish, then kasher reisha mitzias l'rav. But then we're back to the question. So okay, fine. You're saying that the safe is not difficult, which that was Rabbi's whole proof to show. How could you even ask from Rav? Me think it's mitaretzta. That doesn't make sense. No. Okay, but miyashbet. Okay, but then you're back to the difficulty. Then the first and the middle case, which like we're saying is lacha yish. So then that's difficult on Rav because according to Rav it's shalay tavech, shalay hamaycha, all those questions that we asked. Sometimes Vidi says no, it's not difficult because la'olim kul lefnei yish. Truth is that it's similar to what we answered before, but not. It's different. It's before yish. Before yish, not difficult on Rav because of course it's not shalay tavech, shalay hamaycha. Now, at the same time, he says you don't have to say like Rava to switch around the middle case and the last case. The last case, keep as it is, like we explained, is going like Beishamai. So that's not a difficult case. But Hochmai Skin, what are you talking about in the middle case that said that the second guy pays kefil? That we said doesn't make sense. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. The original owner only gave up hope after it was sold, when it was already into possession of the lekeach. They didn't give up hope when it was still by the ganav. The havalei yiush, it's only yiush by the buyer. Oh, so that's why the first guy is going to pay. Dal vehei when this tebechamacha, which we had asked. According to you, Rav, what I mean is yiush. You see the second guy, the lekeach, must have been there was yiush over there because you see that there's a chiyuv of kefir when it's stolen from him. Yeah, that's because there was yiush afterwards. But by the Ganav, the first Ganav, there was no yish. So that's why he paid Dal Behei. Because there was no yish by him for him to acquire it. So it's not Shalei Taber. It was not his own. It was he was Taka's slaughtering the original owner's thing. And the Reisha also, therefore, the second guy is potter from Kefil when he steals from the Ganav because it was before yish. So therefore, it's not difficult on Rav. And said the Gemara just makes a clarification and says, V'loi tema. Don't say this that the Mishnah picks to explain the liability of the second one by a lekeach, and doesn't say a liability of a second one by the first ganav, meaning to say a ganav min a ganav, it's only be mechayev mekefil when he's stealing from lekeach, and to say why can't you say ganav min a ganav, the second guy will be chayev kefil also when it's la'achar yish, the way you explained for lekeach. So says the Gemara, don't say that the reason why we only said Ulekech was Mishum to be in Yish B'Shin Rishos, because you need to have both giving up hope and the change of possession, which would be not like Rav. No. It's not true. But just giving up hope, it would be acquired also by the Ganav the way Rav said. And if someone would steal from the first Ganav after years, you would have to be careful. Ella, rather, says the Gemara, the reason why the Tana picked his whole teaching that there was no yish by the Ganev was because Dole Mishkachas to Mishamit Havayu, you cannot find that both of them are going to pay, meaning Ganev Rishon, the Ganev Sheni, to have the first Ganev pay Dal Vehei, and to have the second Ganev pay Kefil, Ella Bahachi, only like this. Because like Rashi explains, is if you would have yish by the first ganav, then he would not have been chayiv when he sold it dal behei. Could be shalei tevech shleich meicha. And since the middle case is not possible only before yish, so the Tana also taught the Reisha before yish, and therefore in that case he exempted the second ganav from kefil. But the truth is, the second ganav could be chayiv kefil even from the first ganav. It doesn't have to be with a shin rishus. Again, it's just for whatever the reasons we explain, that to be chayiv the first ganav and the second ganav would only be possible if it's tomat lefnei yish. That's why we kept the Reish in the mitziyas of those cases. But the truth is, it would even be with yish alone that the second ganav could be technically chayiv kefil, just that then the first ganav wouldn't be chayiv dal dehei because it would be shalayhu meicher shalayhu tevech. Now the Gemara continues on this halacha of dal dehei. So Itmar, we learned hameicher lefnei yish. If someone sells before yish, so Rav Nachman Amar chayiv, Rav Sheshes Amar pater. Nachman says you're going to be chayiv for the mechira, and Rav Sheshes is going to be pater. So the Gemara explains. Rav Nachman Amar chayiv, he says he's going to be liable because the Torah says that, or you're going to sell it, and vazav, and then you sold it. So loishno lefnei yish, loishno lach yish, doesn't make a difference before yish or after yish. You're chayiv for selling the object. Rav Sheshes Amar pater says he's going to be exempt. Why? Because chiyuve, the liability is actually only la'acha yishu. It's only after yish. Why? Because dahanu maisav. Because then it's effective what you're doing. Because then lekech is in acquire it. Av lefnei yish. But if it's before yish, then actually the lo yahanu maisav, where then what you're doing is not effective because he's not acquiring it, because the original didn't give up hope. So lemechav is actually not going to be liable for the selling. Because we need it to be similar to the slaughtering. What you're doing is effective. So Rashi explains on the bottom, says that there's a three-way machlekes amiram. Rav, that we just finished discussing before, he held that yish is kaina. So therefore, you would only be liable if you sell it only before yish, because if it's after yish, so then you're selling or slaughtering your own object. That was Rav. Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes hold that yish alone will not be a kinyan. Okay, therefore, after yish, you could be chayiv. But what they disagree about is, Rav Nachman does not require a hanu maisav. So therefore, even before yish itself, you would be chayiv. Rav Sheshes holds that no, it has to be a full-fledged mechira. So it has to be specifically after yish. So that's a three-way machlekes amiram, explains Rashi, that we're seeing in our Gemaras. Some Rav Sheshes said, but not in the mean law. He says, where do I get this from? That the mechira to be chayiv for of dal v'hei is only after yish, when at least that then when you can have a shini reshus, then it's going to be a hanu ma'aser, it's going to be effective what you're doing, and then you're liable. Says the time like Linda Bryce, I'm Rabbi Kiva. Says Memema Amatera. Why does the Torah say Tavach Hamacha Misham Dal Dehei? Why is it? Why does the Torah make this penalty when you slaughter and you sell what you stole to pay 4 or 5 times the amount? Because you made roots that you got rooted in the sin, which sounds like that what you did was effective. Now, Amos, when is this? If it's before the owner gave up hope, are you rooted? Of course not, nothing was effective. A love rather must be lacha yish, or after yish, and then you sell it. So you see, it's only lacha yish, which Amar Rav, and we already said this on the top of the summer from the previous daf. No, it's not shenishtadish, because you repeated the sin. But you're right, not necessarily were you effective. It could even be lifnei yish. Tashma, I'll try to bring a raya, not like Rav Nachman. The Brisa says, "Utavachai oy is the gear to oy machare." If you slaughtered it or you sold it. Now says the Brisa, "Matvi ein shein chazer," just like slaughtering doesn't come undone. Av mechicha shein chazer, so too the sale does not come undone. Now Amos, when is this? Ilim lefnei yish, before yish amayin chazer. Why would it not be undone? Of course, nothing was done yet. Nothing was effective. The original didn't give up hope. Ella achi yish, rather must be after yish. Shmamina, we see chiyuv, the liability of selling is la'achi yish, who is only after yish, like the way Rav Sheshes said, not like Rav Nachman. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman interpreted no prat l'shikna l'shleshim yom. We said this before already, and this is what we referenced before. That no, it's excluding if you were only sold it for 30 days. That's chezeres. But in chezeres doesn't mean that it's effective. It could be it's not effective, but at least you did a full-fledged mechira. Then you're going to be chayiv. And V'afar Belaza Savar, even also Rabbi Belaza holds like Rav Sheshes that chiyuv l'achar yishu, that the liability is going to be after yish. Why? Rabbi Belaza says, he says, Teda, you should know, Shestam Geneva, that generally, when something is stolen, right away, yish bailamhu, the owner gives up hope. And if the Ganev sells it to someone else right away, that other person will acquire it because there's two things. The owner already gave up hope, and now you have a change of domain. We didn't know this from. Because the Torah says regarding a ganav that tavach macha, if he slaughters and he sells a mishlam to shulma b'chamish, has to pay 4 or 5 times the amount. Now the question is, v'dimaloy yayish. Maybe the owner didn't give up hope yet, and it's not a sale. Allah, rather obviously from the min, because we say stam geneva yish bailani, that in general, when something is stolen, the owner is going to give up hope. Oh, so obviously we see from the fact that Rabbi Lazar learns out the reasoning from this. Obviously, Rabbi Sheshes, in other words, that if we hear that the owner explicitly was not give up hope, that you're right, the sale would be part from Dal Vehei. It's only because we assumed that there was yish. So you see, he also holds like Rabbi Sheshes. But again, the Gemara says, but how do you know this? V'dima, maybe the Torah holds you liable when you slaughter or you sell, avagav duloya yayish, that even though he did not give up hope. So we're asking on Rabbi Lazar that he learns from here that, because yes, tam geneva these years, how do you know? Maybe to the contrary, maybe he holds like, maybe the pasuk actually telling like Rav Nachman, that because you don't need yish. Amri, they said, no, you can't entertain to think that there is no yish, because we need it to be similar to slaughtering. Ma tzvicha, just like slaughtering dahana ma'asav, that his actions are effective. Av mechira dahana ma'asav. So to the sale has to be that his actions are effective. If it's before yish, what was effective? So it has to be effective. And then he's doing this mechira. Oh, so then it's yish and shin rishus. How do you know there's yish? Oh, must be because tam geneva that there's yish. Says the Gemara, how do you know that? Maybe it's talking about the pasuk is talking about when you heard he was miyayish. But maybe stam geneva, you cannot learn that. How do you know that it's talking about a case of stam? Somebody said, no, you cannot entertain this. Why? Because dumida tevicha, again, has to be similar to slaughtering. Ma tvicha alta, just like by slaughtering, it's right away, which whatever's happening right away. Av mechir alta, so too, sale is also, meaning just like slaughtering you could do right away, there's nothing holding you back. So too, by selling, it has to be also that you can do right away, and it doesn't have to mean that you heard it was miyash. Must be kastam gedeva is yish bayil. So again, we see that Rabbi Lazar held like Rav Sheshes. Now, Amalei Rabbi Yechon said to Rabbi Lazar, he says, really, geneva benefesh techiach, a kidnapping, someone steals a person and sells him, can disprove this logic, because she'en yish bailam, as Rashi says, a person not misyayish on himself, a person doesn't give up hope on himself. So the owner is not miyayish, and yet v'chayiv, still the Torah holds you liable even though your actions are not effective. So how could you say that the liability of mechira is only, and Torah discuss it, but it's not compared to tzvicha? So what is the Gemara asking? The svara is there that you see that a mechira you'll be liable even if it's not effective, even if there's no yish. So how are you saying over here that mechira is only going to be if it's mahana ma'asav is going to be effective? That was Rabbi Yechon's question, Rabbi Lazar. So the Gemara now gets into a conversation from Rabbi Yechon. Whoa, Machal Rabbi Yechon, is that to infer Rabbi Yechon held lefnei yish chayiv? That after yish, that before yish you're going to be chayiv, as he's saying. No, you see the by kidnapping there's no yish, and you see you're going to be chayiv. So too he's saying for the mechira, fine. So you see Rabbi Yechon holds like that, which was like Rav Nachman. The question, however, is la'acha yish mai. After he gives up hope, then the question is, what would you hold over there? In other words, does he hold that just yish itself would be a kinyan like Rav, and if that's the case, you actually would not be chayiv because shalayu meicha shalayu tebeach, or maybe no, maybe he holds yish is not kaina, and all the more so after yish you should be chayiv because then it's hana ma'asav. So it's not clear what would he hold after yish. And that says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechon Amachayiv. Rabbi Yechon himself says, yes, you're going to be chayiv, and that's because he does not hold like Rav. And Rish Lakish on Pater, Rish Lakish says you're going to be Pater, as the Gemara explains. Rabbi Yechon Amachayiv says you're going to be chayiv because like Rav Nachman, which is chiyuve, his liability is bein lefnei yish, bein la'ach yish, whether before or after yish. Rish Lakish on Pater says you're going to be Pater chiyuve lefnei yishu. The liability is only before yish. But like Rav, after years, you're ready to coin it. If that's the case, you're selling or slaughtering your own, and then you're not going to be liable. The Gemara continues, it's Rabbi Yechon Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yechon asked Rish Lakish from Mishnah on Daf Ayin Dalet on the base. Mishnah says, Gana v'hikdash, if someone stole something and then he sanctified it, v'achach tavach, and then after he made a hekdash, he slaughters it. So Meshav Tashum Kevel, he's going to pay Kevel to the owner because he stole something. But the Meshav Tashum B'chamish is not going to pay 4 or 5 times the amount because when he slaughtered it, it was hekdashes that he slaughtered. And the Torah says Re'ehu, which is his friend, Yisham Shneim L'Re'ehu, You only pay the double to his friend and not the hektish. Now, although that's regarding kefil and he is paying kefil, but once you're exempt for hektish for kefil, so then we cannot make you liable anymore for the tvicha mechira because the tashlum of dal v'hei, says the Torah, is counting the double of the stealing, which would mean you don't pay 3 or 4 or 5 times 3 or 4. So the 4 or 5 is including the kefil. If you're taking away the kefil, it would be 3 or 4. So therefore, you're not going to be chayev for the dal v'hei for the hektish for the slaughter. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says later on the Ayin Dal. Says the Gemara, wait. So Amos, when's this talking about? If he had sanctified it before the owner gave up hope, mikdash, is it going to be holy? What do you mean? But ish kiyakdish is basic kodesh. When the Torah says when the man's going to sanctify his house, which teaches us if you want to be makdish something, it has to be similar to the biblical case. A ma based shaloi, just like his house is own. Avkol shaloi, whatever's is his. And now before Yish is not his, so the Gana wouldn't be able to be makdish to have the salacha. Elab should rather obviously must be talking about la'acha Yish. It's after the owner gave up hope. Oh, but time and the reason is the hikdishu. The reason is because he sanctified it. Oh, that's why we're saying the is not going to be 4 or 5 times, not like we explained, because it's only Re'ehu, but not for hektish. The chikatavach, because when you're slaughtering it, the hektish katavach, you're slaughtering hektish is abaloi, but it sounds like abaloi hektish, but if he didn't sanctify it, what would the halacha be? If he was tavach, if he slaughtered it, then he would have to pay 4 or 5 times the amount. Wait a second, says Rabbi Yechanan, asking on Rish Lakish. If you would think to say, as you hold, not like me, you hold like Rav, that Yish is kinda. Wait a second, am I Mashalim? Why is he paying? You're saying that there's already Yish, and now you're saying with Yish you're kinda. So Shalehu Tevech Shalei Meicha. What do you mean? He's slaughtering and selling his own. Like Rav held, you should be pater. Why are you being chayiv? You're only being pater because of hektish. What do you mean? Forget about hektish. You should be pater simply because there was already Yish. So Malay, so Shlaka said to what are we talking about over here? Is Dishuhu Bailim Biyad Ganav. Actually, it's before Yish. But I thought you said he can't be Makdashit because it's not his. No, the Ganav wasn't Makdashit. The owner was Makdashit in the possession of the Ganav. And it's the owner's because he didn't give up hope yet. That's why it's hektish. But you're right, it's not La'ach Yish. Says the Gemara, Mikdash? Really? Is it able to be sanctified before Yish, even by the original owner? But Rabbi said the following halacha: Gazel b'lo nisar shabayim. If someone robbed something and the original owner didn't give up hope, shneim ein yichem lahakdish. Both of them cannot go ahead and sanctify it. Why? So zelafisha in the shaloi, the gana of the gazlan because it's not his. But zelafisha in meshusay, and the original because it's not in his possession anymore; it's in someone else's possession. So how could you answer me and tell me that it's taka before Yish and the way it became hektish was because of the original owner, but it's not in the original owner's possession? Somebody said, you're right, that's Rabbi Yechanan's teaching. But who, Rish Lakish himself, who answered that it's told that the original owner is the one who sanctified it, he holds not like Rabbi Yechanan, Lama Kitznuan, he holds like Vitznuan. What does it mean, Vitznuan? It's not like we learn the Mishnah Mesechta Ma'aseh Sheni. The Gemara brings later on, in Daf Samach Tesem and Aleph, on the next Daf, that regarding a Kerem Revai, if you have a vineyard in its 4th year, like a Netta Revai, the Halacha Kerem Revai, the Mishnah says, Hatznuin, the discreet ones, the people that were Hasidim, that wanted to remove any person from sin. So when they would have a vineyard in its 4th year, which has certain halachas like Ma'aser Sheni, they were concerned that maybe some passerbys will eat from it without redeeming it, which you're not allowed to. You have to redeem it. It has halacha like Ma'aser Sheni. So what they would do is like this. They would leave money and they would say like this: Kol hanilket mizeh, whatever is going to be picked from this vineyard by people today, from here, should be deconsecrated on these monies, so that people are not violating; it's already redeemed. But obviously, we see that even though it's not in their possession, it's being redeemed, and the money is going to take effect on that sanctity. So you see that it doesn't have to be in your possession for the deconsecration, for hektish to take effect. So therefore, that's who Rish Lakish was going like. That has the Gemara. If the owner sanctified it, so then why does the Ganav pay kefil? But varichazir keren lebailim. But it's like the principle was given back to the owner because the owner was makdash wherever it is. Kefil is only make you liable if the Ganav is caught red-handed when witnesses come, like it says in Matzah to Matzah B'yad HaGeneva. but it was already quote unquote given back to the original owner because he was makdash it. Says the Gemara, we're talking about Kisha Amad Bedin, that the witnesses came before the original owner was makdash it. They already brought him to court, and then the original owner was makdash it. So therefore, he's liable for kefil. So the Gemara says, wait a second, what's the case talking about? They must have to clarify this because Ida Amri, if they told him, say tenloi, go out and give them the money, so Ma'ir Hikdish. So why are you saying anything about that he was makdashit? I feel lo hikdish. Then even if it was not makdashit, nameloi lechayv, he should also not be chayv dal because the Amar Rabba said, say tenloi, if the court said, go give him, and then dead tavach macha, then he slaughtered and sold the parties exempt, my timer, because given the Paskula Milsa, since they already set the verdict, but tavach macha, and he sells it, or he slaughters it, have a gazlan. He's not a ganim anymore, he's a gazlan. Because he's an outright robber, because we know that he owes it, but Gazlan Masham Tavasham Bachamisha, and the Gazlan doesn't pay 4 or 5 times the amount. But as you get 10 Tavasamach Tasaman Aleph, if the court tells him Chayivat to leave, they didn't say 10, they didn't say go out and give him. They said you're obligated to give him. So then if Tavach Hamachav he slaughters or sells it, then Masham Tavasham Bachamisha, and then he would pay 4 or 5 times the amount. My time, what's the reason? Given the Paska Milsa, since it wasn't yet the final really verdict yet, he's still a thief. The Gemara says, you're right. Then we have to say that they told them only you have to give it, and therefore we need to have the case told about that he was makdash, the original owner, to exempt the ganav from dal v'hei, and because there's no kefil for, and so to speak, and so to dal v'hei for hektish. But if it was already save it tenlai, then you're right. Then you would have been pater from dal v'hei, like we said, because then you were gazlan, and then gazlan nachayev on tzvicha mechira. But the reason why is because we're talking about only chayvat tidlin loy, so then therefore he's still like a ganav because it wasn't final, and therefore we have to have the reason why it's going to be potter is simply because of hektish. But it's not difficult on Resh Lakish because again he holds like the Tznuin who hold that yes, which we're going to continue to further discuss on the next half, who hold that even something that's not in your possession, you could go ahead and you can be makdash, and therefore it's talking about before years. But you're right, if it was la'acha years, then he holds like Rav, which would hold that years alone would be koina, and then therefore, yes, you'd be pot already even without being makdash. Thank you to any time for hosting us.